belly, and I invite you to take a look at the information I've compiled on my Facebook page and on my YouTube channel. All of the information you can find in the video description. Click Show More, and it will have a bunch of links and info that we can all research. So my deal is trying to find out information regarding science, the suppressed studies that are not talked about in mainstream, and trying to put information on the table so that we can all sort through it together and apply it in regards to machines, powering our homes, and just bettering our health in general. So this video is going to be dealing with some very technical and profound concepts. A lot of it's going to be controversial. Talking about energy, Einstein, Newton, and Walter Russell, John Searle, cavitation, sonoluminescence, and a bunch of other stuff. So look at the first few minutes of this video, first 6 or 7 minutes, just to get an idea of what we're going to be talking about and getting into, just to get your interest, and take a look through the information in the video description again. Just familiarize yourself with the type of information that I am trying to put out and trying to ask. And this is a team effort, because I still have a lot of questions. I'm still using gasoline in my car, and I'm still paying for my electric bill in my house. I don't like that. And I'm sure none of you do either. So that's why I spend a lot of time to search for ways that we can change things for ourselves using what's around us, and just acknowledging the hidden sciences that aren't promoted in mainstream. So this video is dealing with information not promoted in mainstream. So be aware. Thank you.
It's a process called sonoluminescence.
The first time I saw sonoluminescence was in a darkened room. I was transfixed to look at this spherical flask of fluid. And you'd look into the center, and in the center see a glowing blue-purple light, which could be seen with the unaided eye. It looked like a star in the heavens.
Seth Putterman called it the star in a jar, a tiny spot of bright light contained in a flask of liquid. This star in a jar is made when a sound wave is passed through a small bubble inside a flask of liquid. And this sound wave makes the bubble do something remarkable. First it expands, then it collapses. And this collapse happens so violently that vapor molecules trapped inside the bubble slam together and heat up so much that the bubble gives off an incredible burst of heat and light, several thousand times a second, giving the appearance of a star. What made the phenomenon so exciting was the temperature of this star in a jar. On its surface alone, the light burns at tens of thousands of degrees.
Hiding under the rock is a pistol shrimp, and he's packing a lethal weapon. This crab is heading into trouble. Our shrimp is ready for a fight. At first sight, it looks like he's punching the intruder with his claw. But in fact, something much stranger is going on, something we can only see if we look again in slow motion. That sound we hear is not from the claw itself, but from an amazing invisible force. The claw's snap happens so fast, it causes a high-velocity water jet, which shoots forward at almost 60 miles an hour, fast enough to vaporize the water and form a bubble. But this is no ordinary bubble. For an instant, it's as hot as the surface of the sun, and as it collapses, this vast energy is released like a superheated shockwave, stunning or even killing its prey. The knockout punch comes not from the claw, but from the super hot power of a bubble.
Demonstrate how much power he could generate with just a short thrust of his fist. Bruce showed off what he called his 1-inch punch. A young martial arts fan saw Bruce.
What he has tried to do is to capture the intriguing effect he'd noticed in that vibrating boiler pipe and use it to create a totally new water heater, one that works without any heat source. His company now produces what amounts to a well-engineered water hammer. It thumps and smashes the water fed into it and raises the temperature to boiling point or to steam in a matter of seconds to replace household or industrial boilers. And they happen to call these machines pumps.
What we have is a hydrosonic pump that has a rotor located inside. It's a cylinder that has holes bored in it at specific angles and depths, ranging from a few hundred holes up to a few thousand, depending on whether we're going to make hot water or steam.
The key to the machine seems to be the number and the design of the holes in the rotor. Biggs has experimented with many different combinations to get the best results. The rotor fits tightly into a steel chamber with only a very small gap between the two. Water is fed into the gap, and the rotor is spun rapidly by a small electric motor. As it spins, the water is pummeled and hammered through the holes. In seconds, it flows out of the cylinder as hot water or steam. What's so extraordinary about such an organ-looking machine is the claim that it is more than 100% efficient. More energy has been measured coming out in the form of heat or steam than the electrical energy needed to turn the rotor. The term for this is over-unity. Scientifically, this is supposed to be impossible because it overturns the fundamental law of conservation of energy.
Just a side note, it seems that the pistol shrimp is overturning the laws of conservation of energy by generating heat equal to the sun without having the mass of the sun. It seems that the sonoluminescence phenomenon is generating more power out than in, seemingly, because it is generating the heat and light equal to suns and stars without having the mass of the suns and the stars. Something else is going on. Look at this. It's an ultra-efficient LED that puts out more power than is pumped in, according to MIT. And it says that the extra energy comes from the interaction of lattice vibrations. So what temperature is the pistol shrimp's claw during the point where the bubble is at its highest temperature? And compare that to the surface of the sun. Could we be misinterpreting the sun's temperature with the temperature around the sun, just as we might be misinterpreting the temperature of the bubble versus the claw that generates the bubble? The intersecting wave fields are what generate the heat, the implosion, but the claw itself is not hot. So we're going to get to that in a little bit. Or we could also ask, how hot is an ionized particle? It's not really a logical question. But a particle itself that's ionized might not necessarily be hot. But when it's in motion, or if the electricity from that charge arcs onto something else, you can measure the temperature within that arc of electricity. But the particle itself that was ionized is not hot. Not necessarily. So the discharge that you measure contains the heat within it. but the actual object that is discharging might not necessarily be hot.
What I have here is basically a magnet, a chrome-plated neodymium magnet sitting in water, sitting on a metal plate with a little tiny insulator that's sitting on. And what I do is I basically apply a voltage to the side of the magnet, okay, inducing a helical vortex, like a miniature tornado, basically through the gas bubbles that are being generated by the electricity. And it's inducing this magnetic flux to be shown by the frame dragging off the bubbles. It's absolutely incredible. I don't think you're going to see this anywhere on YouTube.
John had also stumbled on yet another amazing breakthrough.
You have enough in there?
His machine could actually burn salt water. John Kansas discovered that his radio frequency generator could release the oxygen and hydrogen from salt water and create an incredibly intense flame.
Just like that. If that was inside a car cylinder, you could see the amount of fire that would be in the cylinder. I can put my hand in here.
Put your hand into the beam, nothing happens. Put in a fluorescent bulb and it lights up immediately. At the APV Company Laboratory in Akron, top engineers have checked out John's amazing invention, and they were amazed.
And we saw it go up to 1,500 degrees centigrade, the temperature. And it's incredible.
This simple Stirling engine is running with the heat generated by the flames coming off that test tube. The fuel, nothing more than salt water.
Well, that could be a steam engine, a steam turbine. Could be a car engine if you wanted it to be. This is the most abundant element in the world, water. And salt water is everywhere. And to see it burn actually gives me chills.
So imagine the possibilities.
And so I'm starting to compare all of these people's work and all of these different things, the commonalities between what generates this phenomenon. And in looking at that, I found that all of them have a geometric lattice structure. So I put this paper together called Atomic Alignment, Etheric Diodes, and Magnetization. And I also put a 9-part video to go along with that I uploaded on YouTube called Atomic Feng Shui, What a Magnet Is and Why. So I invite you to also look at that, which will help put in context the rest of this information. So I started looking into more geometries on the surface and the lattice of something as a whole. And going back to this cavitation hydrosonic pump, here are the parts to the pump. We see in the upper left, it's a cylinder with holes bored into it, or dimples. So I started looking into water structurizers and how water starts to flow over things in different environments, in different tubes or different shapes. Fluid mechanics. Started looking into the aerodynamics of golf balls. Original ones had triangular dimples, didn't work out too well. Then they had sort of a square mesh, also didn't work out well. Now the standard is hemispherical dimples, about 432 dimples average. Now we have these new balls with hexagonal dimples, about 332. We compare the efficiency and the aerodynamic quality of these shapes, and the hexagons seem to be the most efficient. Now that we've gone over some basic concepts and have context, in this next part we're going to take a look at more examples of water, biomimicry, we're going to take a different look at the model of the atom, solar system, so-called overunity, and a lot more. Take note to the geometric structure of the honeycomb. And looking at the aerodynamics of the golf ball, hexagons are the most efficient. So can we combine that with the hydrosonic pump to make that even more efficient? Instead of having cylindrical holes drilled into it, would it be more efficient to have hexagonal dimples or hexagonal holes? Pretty much we're looking for a cylindrical honeycomb, and I have never seen an image of that on the internet other than a 3D graphic of a carbon nanotube. So why not apply that to a macro level and spin it and see what happens? This image comes from a book called My World, written by Viktor Grebennikov, a Russian entomologist studying very strange things that he called the cavernous structure effect. Cavernous structure creates cavitation. And this is a wooden dreidel with holes that he drilled into it. And when he spun it and put his hands next to it, he said he could feel a type of heat, but it wasn't normal heat. It was resulting from the cavernous structure. So compare this to the hydrosonic pump once again. Continuing research into fluid dynamics, honeycomb structures, and water, I came upon the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto and Clayton Nolte. Clayton Nolte has a device he calls a water structurizer, which has spheres stacked on top of each other inside of a PVC pipe. When the water flows through that pipe, it's forced to run over the spheres in a geometric path. So the geometric structure of the spheres structurizes the water as it flows through. But taking a closer look inside of Clayton Nolte's device, I saw that they weren't just spheres, they had some texture to them. And I tried to zoom in here, and it seems that there's some sort of a hexagonal texture to his spheres. So it's more than just a smooth sphere. There's something even more to the hexagonal structure. So I put together my own water structurizing setup so that I can experiment and see how water flows and combine a bunch of different technologies. And you can see the videos I put together and I've experimented with in the video description. Every day I watch how water flows. Every day I try something new. Just observe. And a year ago I put together this video called Fist Fights with Physicists. And this next segment is going to be from that video. And I also included a bit from a documentary called Water, the Great Mystery. Here are a few pictures of Dan Winter's imploder nozzle. Here is the design in 3D, and also compared to the caduceus. The water cycled through Dan Winter's imploder system is enhanced. By enhanced, I mean it has documented lower surface tension and increases the zeta potential in the bloodstream. Zeta potential is the electric potential and increased conductivity. In the blood, this means increasing the capacitance per brain synapse. Circulating water in a specific vortex before watering plants will result in dramatic growth of up to 3.5 times bigger. Compare these findings to the documentary called Water, the Great Mystery.
With modern technology, it is possible to structurize water artificially. When seeds were grown under laboratory conditions using this kind of water, the soy sprouts had 6 times greater photon radiation than when ordinary water was used. Using structurized water makes vegetables ripen faster and increases the amount of useful microelements and vegetable proteins several-fold.
If we look at the shoots, the treated ones were long, even, and strong, while the untreated ones were short, thin, and weak. If we look at the plants today, those from the selected seeds have all ripened, but the ones from non-selected seeds have not. We have to say that using structurized water really does affect the growth of vegetables and fruits.
Documentary is collecting samples of water from a remote area in Venezuela, who were later tested for the electric conductivity.
Professor Korotkov's laboratory has developed an instrument that can determine the energetics of water. It works on the basis of the Kirlian effect. Everything that enters a strong electromagnetic field begins to emit light. The greater energy the object possesses, the brighter it shines. The water from Venezuela was compared with ordinary drinking water.
We can say that this water is not double, not triple, but it is 40,000 times more active. So these are really two fundamentally different substances. And water of this type, this water, which immediately activates the body, it activates the whole system.
But not by drinking ordinary water. Have to drink structurized water, which means that you are geometrically reordering the water, or you're just sending that water down a geometric path. Natural is like a waterfall. You can have it flow around spheres. You can have it flow down a vortex. There are an infinite number of ways that you can restructure your water, because this technology is a know-how. That you can apply this know-how to any given device and technology and make your own device and sell them to other people. Or you can just tell people how it all works and everybody can build their own devices based on this information. So when you drink this type of water, it allows for your blood to become more electrically conductive, and you have a lot of benefits. You water plants with it, they grow a lot faster. There's just a lot of weird stuff to look into and test out for yourself. So on this next part, we see in the upper left an excerpt from Walter Russell's book called Atomic Suicide. And we see sickle cells on the right, all compacted together, and healthy cells on the left. In the lower left-hand corner, we see again the compacted cells and the freely floating red blood cells. And in the upper right, we see an example of biomagnetism. Somebody was just treated by having magnets put on specific parts of their body for a couple hours, and then they tested their blood again. Wow. And then here's an example of magnets that I have. I've broken a lot of magnets, and they collect together in a big chunk. Just so happens they look very similar to the acidic blood or the unhealthy blood. And then magnets that are able to freely float around each other, they look much like the red blood cells. So down here we have an example of the tap water on the left and the structured water on the right, which seems to encapsulate all of the impurities of the water. There are a lot of other examples. Here's another: acidic blood versus alkaline blood.
Let us see how this type of water affects human blood. The doctor is drawing blood from a patient's finger. Using a special microscope, we shall be able to see the condition of her body from this drop.
These are red blood cells, and they've lost their electrical charge, so they're all stuck together in a formation called a rouleau. Here's a huge symplast. Symplasts are associated with heart disease and arthritis and lung disease and many other conditions that could be coming in the future.
The doctor asks the patient to drink a small amount of structurized water. After 12 minutes, the doctor again draws blood from the patient and studies it.
So you can see that the cells then become buoyant, they become slippery, and they have their electrical charge, so they repel each other. That allows them to carry oxygen, and it means that we're changing the pH of the blood back to an aerobic environment rather than an anaerobic environment. I think that's utterly amazing that just drinking water could do that.
And we're going to go and see this little segment from Top Secret Water. It's a documentary from 2005.
At all events, the machine contains pipes made of titanium and ceramic membranes, through which the water is conducted and in some way activated. What happens to normal Moscow tap water in a matter of seconds is illustrated here by a test involving a few drops of ink. On the left, plain tap water. On the right, Bakir's altered activated water. While, as might be expected, the ink colors the tap water, the activated water swallows it up completely. Much of what happens here beggars scientific explanation.
Well, there are plenty of scientific explanations out there, and there are plenty of products to help validate those explanations. Now we're going to start taking a look at biomimicry, because most of these amazing results just come from imitating nature. The more that we attempt to mimic nature and combine that with human ingenuity, the more that we will be able to reap results that mainstream models might not account for. And from what I can conclude, geometry equals power. More accurately, collective geometry is directly proportional to electrical conductivity. So the more that you can account for geometry on small scales working together, it will contribute to a larger benefit as a whole. And that's what nature does on very small scales, nanoscale and beyond. Things are arranged in geometric fashions which allow for energies to either pass around or through, which results in eddy currents and a lot of other benefits. In the next part of the video, we're going to take a look at Jay Harmon's perspectives and the difference between propellers and impellers. We're also going to go back to the concept of cavitation and look at that in relation to the model of the atom and the solar system, and John Searle's technology, some of the work of Walter Russell, and see what else we can cram in here. So here we have the picture of the Lilly impeller, or the PEX impeller, next to some diagrams from Walter Russell from 1926. Now we're going to take a look at the difference in efficiency of a propeller and impeller. Take a look at this video.
For something to exist, it must be moving. So every single thing in this universe is moving. The interesting thing is that all of that movement in nature has a particular spiraling path. Nature never ever moves in a straight line. No such thing. So that is nature's streamlining principle.
Gotta have a side note. Nothing ever travels in a straight line. All things come from a rotating frame of reference. And as Walter Russell put it, all direction is curved and all motion is spiral.
When I froze the whirlpool that you see in your bathtub, you pull the plug out, there's the whirlpool. If you freeze that whirlpool, it's exactly the same geometry as a hurricane or a tornado or any other spiral, the cochlea of your ear. This shape is archetypal in nature. And so when I froze this, I was then able to rotate it and create. Because I had a frozen whirlpool, I was able to create a whirlpool. So one of the first things that I used it on, particularly in America, there are great big holding tanks. Well, that water gets stagnant. The municipalities that manage that water have to put chlorine and chloramines into the water. The problem is better solved by mixing that water. Generally throughout the world, if you want to mix water, it's very expensive. I put one of these frozen whirlpools in the bottom of one of these tanks, 6 inches high, 4 inches wide, and I rotated it with a couple of 100 watts of power, a couple of light bulbs of power, and I found it was able to mix an entire tank of water, 10 million gallons, which from an engineering point of view is not even conceivably possible. So from there, I started adapting these shapes into fans. Fans use 18% of the world's electrical energy. They're not terribly efficient. We found time and time again we could take the best fan in the world and reduce its energy by as much as 30%. So pretty much everything in an industrial world can be improved by taking these shapes from nature and reconfiguring what engineers build today.
More order, more power. Can always have more order. Can always refine things more. Always have more geometry. More nanoscopic textures. Can always have things working together to achieve a synergistic outcome. Listen to what that man said. He said 200 watts can move 85 million pounds. That's 10 million gallons of water. So a helicopter blade in that water spinning with 200 watts, do you think that would achieve the same vortex? The same amount of power? No. Because it's only spinning on a 2D flat plane. You need to have 3 dimensions of spin. So why not mount Tesla turbines or something like that inside of the industrial tank? So as the vortex is being generated by that 200 watts, the weight of that water is being funneled through some Tesla turbines and possibly generate some excess power while moving that amount of water. Here is Paul A. Laviolette's book called Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion. I liked the book overall, especially chapter 10 dealing with Professor Searl's technology. And also he might have wanted to change the title from anti-gravity propulsion to anti-gravity impulsion, because it seems that impellers are much more efficient than propellers and impulsion systems. So this brings us to Victor Schauberger's implosion repulsine. And the benefits from his device, the weight reduction, the air and water being sucked through helical grooves, ordered grooves, working collectively at tangential angles. So there's a lot of stuff to look into this particular device and Victor Schauberger in general. Here we see a propeller blade, something like a ceiling fan. Now, propeller blades spin on a 2D flat plane. The angles of the blades might be tilted a little bit, but all in all, the blade itself spins on a 2D flat plane. The image on the lower right is the path that it traces while traveling in the air, traveling through space. The propeller spins and it traces that path, like an Archimedes screw. But the difference between a propeller and an Archimedes screw is that the screw is the actual shape that the propeller blade traces. So the propeller blade just spins in 2D, but it's traveling forward. So the propeller traces that shape. But the Archimedes screw is the actual shape. So that's a main difference between a propeller and an impeller. Propeller spins in 2D, impeller spins in 3D. Another big difference between a propeller and an impeller is that the propeller pushes outwardly and an impeller pushes inwardly. It doesn't pull, it doesn't attract or suck anything in. It's pushed in the inverse direction through the impeller. It's the inverse push. And because it pushes inwardly, it creates an inward vortex. So you take a vortex, you spin a vortex, and you make another one. If you take a propeller and you spin it, it's being ejected outward radially, all that energy. And if you move forward, you're going to trace a helical trajectory. But if you actually form an object to a helix, then you spin that, it's going to be even more beneficial. But even an Archimedes screw is cylindrical. But a vortex is more the shape of nature, a logarithmic spiral. Things might trace a cylindrical path while spinning, but nature itself is more of a 3D vortex shape. And that's what we need to mimic, is spinning 3D vortex shapes or having coils in cones rather than cylinders, and see what happens there.
And we put that in a huge tank of water, and there's our device. And there's our competitor's device. And we do the job better. Well, most flow is looked at as two-dimensional. So if you've got a wing, for instance, let's say that's a wing, you're looking at the flow going over the top and under the bottom. You're not looking at the flow going this way. So everything in nature has 3 dimensions. Most of our science is really dealing with 2 dimensions, and most of our tools are as well. So you can see the spiral here in the end. That's a pretty familiar spiral you see in your whirlpool. And that's easily understood, but it's 2 dimensions. It's this dimension and this dimension. But look, we've got a 3rd dimension. And you can see it's changing in the 3rd dimension. That's very complicated. I mean, it's infinitely complicated. If you think about it, every living thing goes through a liquid phase in its development. So it takes on the geometry of turbulence. So every living thing on Earth has these geometries built into it. From the cochlea of your ear, to the spacing between your teeth, the size of your teeth, to, even if I look at my finger, the length of that in proportion to that bone and in proportion to that bone are the same proportions that you find in these spirals. So it's everywhere.
Wanted to mention one more thing before we change subjects. Regarding Victor Schauberger, we see his device here, and we can compare that to a more modern unit called a disperser, and wanted to bring it back even further, taking a look at this object, which was uncovered from ancient Egypt in the valley of the Nile. I believe that this could be an impeller. See, it says the mysterious Egypt tri-lobed disc. Now, to me, it looks just like an impeller. And it just so happens it was uncovered in the valley of the Nile, where large amounts of water would need to be circulated. And also compare the Egyptian piece to the first Avro car from 1958. Now, I also heard that Archimedes got his idea for the screw after he visited Egypt, which is even more significant. Here are a couple picture comparisons of the differences between propulsion and impulsion, a propeller and impeller, waste and efficiency, big and small, yang and yin. So in the upper left, we have the PEX impeller compared to a regular turbine. In the lower left, we have a regular diesel engine compared to Rafael Morgado's MYT engine, or the MIT engine. And on the right, we have a comparison between a nuclear power plant and Professor John Searle's SEG. We'll get into that later. So taking a look at the difference between waste, heat, and efficiency, let's take a look at the difference between fire and ice, or Edison and Tesla, or explosions and implosions. I wanted to offer a couple of my perspectives on lightning and thunder. I think thunder is the result of an implosion, or the collapse of the atmosphere. I was watching the lightning storms in the San Francisco area here on Thursday, April 12th, for quite a few hours. It was huge show. Got some cool shots on the camera, and I was comparing the lightning and thunder to the sonoluminescence. Lightning is blue and violet. Fire is red and orange. Implosive energy seems to be blue, and explosive energy seems to be red. A loud pop is created from the violent implosion of a cavitation bubble, and a bluish light is associated with that, not a red light that I have seen. Now, Tesla's light bulb had a bluish hue. Edison's, or rather the one that Edison improvised from Tesla, glows red. The shuttle coming into an atmosphere has a hot streak trailing behind it from friction, pushing its way through the atmosphere. All the heat of a lightning bolt, though, is contained within the bolt, just like all of the heat of the sonoluminescent bubble is contained within the bubble. Now you can swat at the bubble underwater and break it up and make a million little bubbles, at which point the heat might be distributed throughout those little bubbles, but all that heat is still contained within the bubbles. The gunshots are explosions. Notice the red fire from the bullets. It takes gunpowder to create an explosive force which projects the bullet, thus the term projectile. But lightning is different. I think something is impelling, not propelling. Take a look at that picture of a volcano with the lightning around it. As the volcano explodes and projects ash into the air, it's charging the atmosphere and changing the pressure potential. And there is such varying extreme pressures in a short amount of time, it releases arcs of electricity. So pay attention to the sound of an implosive bubble versus an explosive bang. See if you can tell the difference. Listen to that pistol shrimp again. I think the sound of a Tesla coil is different than the sound of an explosion. I think we're hearing the atmosphere collapsing at given frequencies, rather than a wave pushing through the atmosphere at a given frequency with a Tesla coil. Now, if you blow up a balloon underwater and then quickly suck all the air back into your lungs, the surrounding water will collapse to the point where the balloon just occupied that space. But if you collapse the balloon fast enough, the water will slap together from the collapse, and that will cause a sound. But it's the result of an implosion, not an explosion. The sound from an explosion will carry radiation with it. The sound from an implosion might not carry radiation because nothing is radiating. It's a different dynamic to achieve sound. Now, other people might think thunder is an explosive sound, but I do not think so. Now we're going to get into the more interesting aspects of this stuff, the implications of controlled cavitation on the atomic level, Hutchison's experiments, Professor John Searle's technology, address the solar system, Einstein's fallacies, Russellian science, and let's see what else we can do. In order to address controlled cavitation on the atomic level, we have to first take a look at the mainstream model of the atom in relation to reality. So we're going to have story time. Using basic logic and Occam's razor, let's take a closer look at quantum mechanics. Occam's razor means that the simplest solution is most likely the correct one. So here is mainstream science's version of Occam's razor. There once was a magical kingdom, and this kingdom exploded into existence from nothing. The smallest parts of that kingdom they call atoms, and they are made up of one-sided coins and one-sided magnets called protons and electrons, with a no-sided magnet called a neutron. They say the proton is an all-positive magnet, and an electron is a massless magnet, but it's all negative. But that positive magnet and the imaginary negative magnet don't go together. Oh no, no. This is a magical kingdom. And in this fantasy world, positive and negative magnets orbit each other on a 2D flat plane. Makes sense so far, right? Now, all these positive magnets called protons are compacted together somehow, even though two positive poles of a magnet will repel each other. Now, the electrons are little balls of negativity but they aren't really there. Yet they orbit around those compacted positive magnets. But wait, not really, because the little balls of negativity are more like a cloud of probability at the same time. And those little guys pop in and out of existence. That's the technical phrase for we don't know what we're talking about. Now that we have all that explained, let's move on to photons. Good old Occam's razor explains it every time. The photon is another massless particle, and that's the fastest moving thing in the universe. But wait, there are other things called neutrinos that travel much faster, but we'll just sweep those under the rug and call it the product of a faulty wire. And oh yeah, tachyons travel faster too, but they don't exist because the king said so. Now, this sort of fastest moving massless particle is also a wave. And it travels in perfectly straight lines like all ocean waves do. Because the ocean is flat, of course. The end. And that's the magical story of quantum mechanics and mainstream science's Occam's razor. But don't worry, there's a bunch of equations and formulae to prove that story. So it must be true. Well, I don't really see it that way, and I know of many others who share the same opinions. All things are in motion. All motion is polarized, which means all things in motion have a north and a south. There's no such thing as a one-sided ball or a singly charged particle. It's illusions of observation or misconceptions. Now, I have my own view of the atom, which is a little more simplistic. I say that that cluster of protons is actually a bunch of buckyballs or magnets compacted together. And each of those little buckyballs in that cluster has a north and a south. But because the cluster has mass, they're trying to call the entire cluster a proton. If people are interested in an alternative and different perspectives, I would strongly encourage looking into Dewey B. Larson and his collected works. And especially look into the book titled The Case Against the Nuclear Atom, which Dewey B. Larson eloquently addresses the misconceptions of the mainstream model of the atom, and the history of those ad hoc misconceptions. Here again we see a picture of Walter Russell's diagram of the structure of the atom and its vortex nature. In 1926, Walter Russell presented the spiral periodic chart of the elements in two formats, an aerial view and a side view, and sent those to hundreds of scientists, and also publishing the Universal One, and sent that to hundreds of scientists and universities as well. With his publication of the periodic chart, he predicted the existence of deuterium and tritium, as well as all of the transuranium elements such as plutonium and neptunium. This is significant again, which we will see in a later video regarding cavitation. By 1927, Walter Russell had transmuted water into 17 different substances at the Westinghouse Lamp Laboratories. An alchemaic action will reap what they label a nuclear reaction, which will be contained within its own field density. A field density is different than a meniscus or wall of a cell. And here we see a picture comparison of John Keely's model of the atom with the standard model of the proton with the quarks, and Dr. Palathodka Keshava Bhatt's model of the universe in a fractal form. So I'm just wondering where cavitation is accounted for in the current atomic model. We see what happens when a propeller blade of a certain orientation spins in a medium. It creates cavitation bubbles in its wake. So a cluster of magnets, the size of what they would label an atom, spinning really quickly, might generate cavitation bubbles in its wake. So how are scientists supposed to discern the difference between a solid particle and a cavitation bubble on the atomic scale. If they don't account for cavitation bubbles, they might make up a bunch of equations to describe the behavior of solid particles. A sonoluminescent bubble is the result of an alchemaic implosion, not a standard explosion. So when scientists are measuring deuterium and tritium from a sonoluminescent implosion, they are trying to duplicate that by taking deuterium and tritium and smashing it together in hopes that they will implode. So they're using an explosive force hoping to create an implosion. It's absurd, which is why I think many people have been having difficulties achieving cold fusion since 1989, because they're trying to explode things and smash them together in hopes that they will implode within themselves, because they think everything was initiated from explosions. They're not looking at the other side of the coin. The bang of a sonoluminescent bubble is the last stage of the cycle before it repeats again, not the first. An imploding cavitation bubble does not compress to one point. The north pole of that bubble caves in on itself to form a hole or a ring, like a donut. Gee, just like Marco Rodin's models, and very similar to what Professor John Searle says happens during his magnetization process with the imprinting of magnetic bubbles, he calls it. Now, some people label this new science LENR, or low energy nuclear reactions, like the work of Andrea Rossi. I just call it alchemy. He puts in nickel and hydrogen and comes out with copper. That's called transmutation. That's alchemy. They can call it what they want, make up new names because we have stigmas and negative connotations associated with these old words, but it's alchemy. Now let's take a look at this video regarding controlled cavitation.
At Aristine, we've discovered a way to harness the power of hydrodynamic cavitation. Hydrodynamic cavitation can be produced by passing a liquid through a constricted channel at a specific velocity. A combination of pressure and kinetic energy is created when the low-pressure cavern created downstream from the local constriction generates high-energy cavitation bubbles. The formation, growth, and implosive collapse of these cavitation or vapor bubbles in the liquid releases tremendous localized energy in the form of shock waves. Whether the waves are destructive or productive depends on your ability to control the process. At the edges of the cavity, small amounts of vapor break off, forming smaller and smaller cavities, 100 nanometers to 3 millimeters in diameter. The smaller cavities implode uniformly under the high pressure surrounding them. Controlled flow cavitation technology controls the location, size, density, and intensity of implosion of the bubbles in the zone to create optimum process conditions.
It's this advanced understanding of cavitation and the ability to apply it to productive process that sets Aristine apart from everyone else in this field. Cavitation can do so many things, and we have just begun to explore its potential.
Aristine Systems. Innovation for the alternative fuel industry.
Normally, cavitation is only detrimental and destructive to a system in impeller blades and propeller blades. And you can see here evidence of the scarring and the pockmarks left behind from the imploding bubbles. Now, what's interesting to me is comparing that damage to John Hutchison's experiments. And here we have a picture of microscopic mixing. So you have two particles that normally would just go together like two magnets or two buckyballs. But you can turn that magnet into a bunch of tinier magnets individualized in a grid, at which point you can pass those two through each other, and then you can reorganize them or recombine them so that they are fused together in a new state. And then we look at John Hutchison's experiments with this butter knife in a solid block of metal. And we see the cavitation damage resulting from that. There's a lot more to these types of sciences. Imagine what we can do on the atomic level. This is microscopic mixing. Imagine atomic mixing. But it's not atomic fusion in the same regard as science knows it currently. It's a fusion resulting from cavitation. So something other than electrons jumping valence is going on here. In the top left, we see a still image taken from former YouTube user Magnet Vortex's video. This is a paperclip sandwiched between two neodymium magnets. Those magnets are in front of an old TV, and we can see what they call the charge distribution from the magnetic field lines. The image on the top right was a nanoscopic microscopy costing billions of dollars over the course of many years, and they claim that for the first time, scientists imaged the charge distribution within a single molecule. For the first time, huh? So by that logic, and the picture comparison, we can say that two magnets are acting like a single molecule. And the evidence can be seen for less than $100 on an old TV. So how much money do we really need to spend? What happens on a micro happens on a macro, and all scales in between.
My name is Cullen Smith. This is Lifting the Veil. You can find all of my full books, presentations, videos, films, articles, posts at subscribestar.com/liftingtheveil. Patreon has suspended this work and my account and income stream for this content. So if you are a supporting patron, then please I ask you to move your support over to subscribestar.com/liftingtheveil. And I have just established a completely free, uncensored, totally free speech social media platform that replaces Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, every other platform all in one on liftingtheveil.locals.com. You can download the Locals app and you can join our group and have totally free speech and totally uncensored, unrestricted content access. And there is also a ton of exclusive content, and I will leave the cited reference links in the description down below. So you can check that out for all of my full content, and I will see you guys in the next video. I rely solely on word of mouth, and the recommended algorithms are not recommending any of my videos or films anymore. My channel has literally been completely restricted, so I rely on your help by sharing my work around if you appreciate it, and leave me your comments. I definitely want to know what you have to share and what you have to think about all of this stuff, and I will see you in the next video.